What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. Just caught the new Coen Brothers movie, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, up at the New York Film Festival. This is a project that was originally intended to be a miniseries created by Annapurna Television. Netflix picked it up to be released in November, and then over the summer, suddenly I started hearing about how they were turning this miniseries into a feature film. And that definitely piqued my curiosity because anthology films, at best, are a mixed bag when it comes to the world of movies. I feel like usually we see anthology films in the world of horror, and I feel like the best anthology films typically have a couple of short films all by the same filmmaker, like Creepshow was all George A. Romero, and Black Sabbath was all done by Mario Bava. And in the case of The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, we have 6 self-contained stories, and in spite of them all being underneath the umbrella of the Western, they all feel like distinctly different stories with distinctly different styles and tones. It feels a little bit like you found a dusty old book of old Western short stories, and while thumbing through it, inevitably you encounter some stories that are stronger than others. But I will say this, if you're a fan of Westerns, or if you're a fan of the Coen Brothers, there's a lot to love in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. It probably won't rearrange the order of my top 5 favorite Coen Brothers films, but without going into any spoilers, I'll say this. The first short film in this movie might be the best movie you will see all year. I've never seen an audience screaming and roaring with laughter at a Western, maybe ever. I did get to see Blazing Saddles one time in the theater, but it was already a bunch of people who loved the movie and that were totally in the bag. And speaking of Blazing Saddles, I'm wearing my Do It for Randolph Scott shirt. It's my only Western-themed t-shirt, and if the message of the shirt is unclear, it's time for you to revisit Blazing Saddles. But I'm scratching my head trying to think of any Westerns that I've ever seen that use the anthology format. Obviously, there have been tons of TV shows that use a similar format, most of which were like 50 or 60 years ago. I guess How the West Was Won has an anthology format. And the classic Anthony Mann Western, Winchester 73, I believe it is kind of an anthology format. It's been years since I've seen it, but basically it follows the story of a rifle as it passes from owner to owner. But this movie makes no attempt to have some sort of overarching theme or through line that ties everything together. You basically see a book on the table with a lot of old-fashioned chapters and a lot of old-fashioned drawings, and this hand is basically turning the pages, and the text and the image and the dialogue perfectly coincide and kind of tease the stories that we're about to see. And I think it was back when Fargo first came out, Ethan Coen published a volume of short stories, which I'm embarrassed to admit I never read. When it comes to the Coen brothers and their output, I've always leaned toward their movies because there's so many good ones to choose from. And I love that they're experimenting with this format, even if it wasn't necessarily a 100% complete home run with each and every story. But it was absolutely killer getting to see them speak before the movie. They brought out the majority of the cast, and Liam Neeson strolled out. Liam Neeson, I think he's like 8.5 feet tall, and he still looks like he's like 40. I don't know what his secret is. But he is an intimidating hunk of man. And when the movie begins, you get this remarkable mix of different kinds of stories, some of which have tons of laughter and tons of music, some of which are insanely, almost grotesquely violent. And there's one story that initially kind of starts out in this really strange, uneven, boring fashion, and by the end of it, you basically will have tears streaming down your face. It's one of the most heartbreaking love stories that I've seen in recent memory. And by the time this thing comes out on Netflix in November, people will be able to just skip around like different episodes to the best ones, same way like you do with like Black Mirror. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if this movie very rapidly becomes kind of a minor cult classic. I can vividly recall when Big Lebowski came out when I was in college. And when it came out in the theater, it just did zero business whatsoever. But over the course of the next year, on videotape and the new format DVD, it just slowly but surely started gaining this foothold and this following. People started throwing Big Lebowski parties where they would serve White Russians and people would smoke tons of weed. And I'm not quite ready to declare The Ballad of Buster Scruggs a cult classic on the level of Big Lebowski, which 20 years in just seems to keep getting bigger and bigger with each passing year. But I think there's going to be a small audience that when they see this movie, like, oh my God, they made this movie just for me. And I don't think you need to be a diehard Coen Brothers fan or a Western fan to enjoy this, because every Western fan has to start somewhere. I can vividly recall when my dad dragged me kicking and screaming to see Young Guns when I was like in 5th or 6th grade. I absolutely did not want to go. I told him I absolutely hated Westerns. And by the end of the movie, I was like, wow, like when can I watch that again? And when can we watch some more Westerns? And basically over the last 30 years or so, I've watched hundreds of Westerns, from like the John Ford films to Bud Bedecker to Anthony Mann to Howard Hawks to Sam Peckinpah, or the Italians like Sergio Corbucci and Sergio Leone. There are so many great Western directors to choose from. And the most important thing about the Western is whether or not a filmmaker is able to bring something new to it. I feel like so many Western fans who become filmmakers, they are crushed beneath the burden of paying homage to all the great Westerns of the past. when what they really should be trying to think of is how do I take the Western someplace new? Like a perfect example would be S. Craig Zahler in a film like Bone Tomahawk. He took the Western to a strange, horrific place that it had never been before, and it's already earned itself a really hardcore fan base. But the Coen brothers are no stranger to Westerns and or kind of hayseed dramas. Even a movie like Oh Brother Where Art Thou, while it takes place in Mississippi, has an extraordinarily rustic feel. Their ear seems to be perfectly attuned to this remarkable form of dialogue and self-expression that perfectly finds a home in the Western genre. Raising Arizona has so many Western ingredients, in spite of the fact that it's this bananas madcap comedy. The Big Lebowski even has some Western elements with that great Sam Elliott narration. And then, of course, you have the more overt Western films in their filmography. No Country for Old Men, probably the best modern Western ever made. And then their remarkable fresh new adaptation of True Grit. I don't say a remake because it wasn't a remake of the original film. It was just a brand new adaptation of the classic novel. But I'm about to get into spoiler territory, so if you don't want any details, bail out now. But with the first short film in the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is actually called The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, they take the Western someplace it hasn't been in a very long time, maybe ever. I mean, perhaps something like Cat Ballou is kind of similar in the fact that it has so much music combined with the Western genre. But while watching this first short film, and it's heartbreakingly short, I wish it was 10 times longer, but it might be the happiest I've been all year. And maybe that sounds kind of pathetic, but it's true. Tim Blake Nelson plays a singing, gunslinging poker player, and it's straight up some of the funniest, most violent, just outrageously entertaining shit that has ever been put on a screen of any size. It opens up with him riding across the desert, singing with his horse clopping to the rhythm of the tune. He talks right into the camera in these crazy extreme close-ups. The first tavern he goes to results in one of the most spectacular shootouts that I've ever seen. It really feels like we're in the truly strange territory of spaghetti westerns. A movie like My Name is Nobody, where it's that bizarre mix of magical realism and western and music and violence. And finally he arrives in town where more violence ensues, but it's the way he takes people out that makes it so imaginative, because it's not like he just shoots them down. He'll do things like shoot off their fingers, turn to the camera, talk about the challenges of the next shot. Or when he's unarmed going up against an armed opponent, he'll do things like kick the table and smack the board up and make them shoot themselves through the head. It's wildly cartoonish, over-the-top, Raising Arizona type violence. But the audience was going berserk. I mean, they were screaming with laughter. It was one of those situations where people were holding their sides in pain. They were laughing so hard. And inevitably, the short draws to a close when yet another badass, gunslinging, singing gambler rides into town. Unlike Tim Blake Nelson, who wears all white and has a white hat, this guy's dressed in all black and has a black hat. We immediately know they're going to come to blows. And I won't say how it ends, but the beautiful thing is, the winner and the loser, who's in the form of an angel holding a harp, they sing a duet as the short draws to a close. It was just a wonderful, beautiful, special thing, and it put the world's biggest smile on my face. But the second short was pretty goddamn good as well. It stars James Franco. It's called Near Algodones, and it's basically about an outlaw who tries to rob a bank in the middle of nowhere. It totally backfires, and then things progressively go from bad to worse to even worse. And somehow, in spite of having this bleak, horrible, tragic ending, it leaves you with this strange sense of satisfaction. It also has probably the most graphically violent battle scene with Native Americans, I think they're Comanche in the movie, that you are ever likely to see. As James Franco is about to be hanged and put to death, the guys who are about to hang him get attacked, and it's just tomahawks and spears and arrows through the throat and scalpings. It's also incredibly athletic combat. It's not like a bunch of shaky cam nonsense. The Coen brothers shoot everything so beautifully. This is a digital production, which is pretty rare for the Coen brothers. And I should also mention that it's Bruno Del Bonell who shot it, not Roger Deakins. Roger Deakins has shot everything of theirs since Barton Fink. Their first DP back in the early days was Barry Sonnenfeld. But Bruno Del Bonell, he also shot Inside Llewyn Davis. But this is easily some of the most stunning, beautiful imagery they have ever put together. But so many people deserve a shout out in this. Tom Waits plays a gold prospector in a short called All Gold Canyon. And it's basically about his adventures looking for gold out west. But he has all these wonderful interactions with owls and elk and fish. And I should also say, in spite of the fact that I think the shorts are uneven in quality, many of these shorts were getting thunderous applause when they drew to a close. And you can almost kind of tell that it was different applause from different sections of the room, depending upon the style and nature of each story, because, like I said, each of these 6 stories, they're so different from each other. But the most moving of them has to be The Gal Who Got Rattled, starring Zoe Kazan. If they haven't already, the entire world is going to fall in love with Zoe Kazan after they watch this short. But it basically follows a young woman who's traveling west to Oregon. She encounters a variety of problems along the way, but sure enough manages to fall in love with the most humble, self-effacing, kind of clumsy, good-natured cowpuncher imaginable. And this one also features an epic battle with a local tribe of Native Americans. However, the curveball of the battle is that it's a field full of prairie dogs, and these prairie dogs obviously all dig holes. So when people are riding around on horses, suddenly horses will step in holes and just collapse. So it makes the battle insanely unpredictable. In any event, I can't wait for this movie to be available on Netflix in November. I will be thinking about it nonstop until then because I'm just dying to watch Tim Blake Nelson in action as Buster Scruggs about 1,000 more times. And when it comes to their overall filmography, it's hard to figure out where this ranks. I would place The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, right up there with their best stuff ever. I feel like they have their first, second, and third tier when it comes to their different movies. And in their first tier, and obviously this is totally subjective, every Coen Brothers fan is going to have a different list, but I'm looking at my IMDb right now, and I would say their first tier is Raising Arizona, Miller's Crossing, Fargo, Big Lebowski, and No Country for Old Men. Those are my favorites. They have plenty of movies that I can totally concede are their equal. I mean, Barton Fink is a brilliant movie. Blood Simple is a brilliant movie. But I also have massive amounts of love and affection for O Brother, Where Art Thou? When that sucker came out, I was actually on a job on a movie set in Las Vegas, and in our casino they had a movie theater, but the only movie I wanted to see was O Brother, Where Art Thou? So I ended up watching it a couple nights in a row. I think I saw it like 4 or 5 times. It's absolutely hysterical. I love it to pieces. While it's not my favorite, there are scenes in Burn After Reading that make me howl with laughter, and I think A Serious Man sometimes gets overlooked as one of the Coen Brothers' more interesting movies from the 21st century. And then when it comes to just good old-fashioned romantic adventure stories, True Grit, I think also sometimes gets overshadowed by the greatness of No Country for Old Men. But these are filmmakers that I've been watching since before I knew who they were. And I always have a different relationship with directors whose work I love before I became conscious of the directors behind the films. Like John Carpenter is one of those guys, and David Cronenberg was one of those guys, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, these directors that I grew up with where I love their movies irrespective of who was behind the camera. And the Coen brothers absolutely fall into that category as well because of Raising Arizona. Saw it a billion times on HBO long before I had any idea of who they actually were. When I got to college, I went back and discovered Miller's Crossing, which is one of my all-time favorite gangster movies. And also, when I was a first or second year in college, Fargo came out, which absolutely just changed my life. So it's safe to say I'm a Coen Brothers fan, but I guess my roundabout point is, I like seeing the filmmakers from my youth still delivering brilliant, exciting, experimental work. So the Coen Brothers made me a very happy movie fan this evening, and I give this movie my strongest possible recommendation, even if that comes with the caveat that it is an uneven movie-going experience, to be totally fair. But I hope you enjoyed this reaction and review. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate it. If you want to talk Coen Brothers or Westerns or all the above, hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax or leave me a comment in the comments below. And I'll be back at y'all probably tomorrow with a review for Venom, which starts in like 10 minutes, like 2 blocks away. So I got to scoot. But thanks as always for watching my channel. I really appreciate it. Onwards and upwards.